Look, thank you for coming along. I will say that Thomas Aquinas, I didn't know much about him, and it's been my great privilege to actually learn more about him. I come from a Protestant background, and therefore, he's a Catholic. Okay, probably not a bad guy, but do I really need to know about him? Well, I'm glad I did. I'm glad. The reason I hold my hand up, we had a meeting, I think it was last year, where we nominated topics for this coming year, and I held my hand up because probably as about a teenager, 13 or so, my mum gave me a book, a devotional book by Thomas Aquinas. So I read through it and I said, oh yeah, I seem to remember something about it. So when the topic was suggested, I thought, yeah, I'll hold my hand up, but I'm really glad that I did because I learned a lot more about him as a character as well as what he taught. Yes. Okay, Thomas's upbringing. He grew up in a place called, where is it? The Castle of Roccaseca in Italy, about 1225, don't hold me to that date. That place is between Rome and Naples. Just look at it, it's beautiful, isn't it? It really is, I love that picture. He was the younger son of a nobleman, a knight, in the service of King Roger II. And even as I was reviewing that tonight, I want to give thanks both to Matt Gray and also I think to Chris Constantopoulos, because various trends, I think he's been mentioned once in the last month or two, we came across King Roger. So this ties in a little bit, for those of you who've been here in last week's, what you've already heard. His uncle was named Cinnibald. I don't know if he's one of those friars with a bald patch on top. He was the abbot of the Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino. Benedictine monks being one of the older orders within the Roman Catholic Church. At 5, Thomas was enrolled at Monte Cassino to become a Benedictine monk, following in his uncle's footsteps, and it is typical also of a younger son of nobility. His 2 older brothers went into the military, as was the custom. He, as a younger son, chose one of the other alternatives, which was to go into the ministry and become a monk. Monte Cassino, that's what Monte Cassino looks like. And partly because I knew Josh and Amethyst would be here tonight, I just wanted to remind folks, I was brought up as an Aussie. I know about Battle of Kokoda. I know about stuff that Australians know, what happened in the Second World War. But it wasn't until I visited my Kiwi cousins, probably 2009 I think it was, and they took me to a New Zealand war museum, that I was reminded that Monte Cassino has another thing that Kiwis might be interested in. One of the first things I learned as I walked into that army museum, New Zealand, was that Kiwis lost more per capita than Aussies, or I think Brits. I think it's fair to say most of the Western nations, Kiwis lost more people in the Second World War than any other Western country, and mainly because of what happened at Monte Cassino. Just briefly, I know this is not going to go too much into Thomas's time. It was the main defence line that General Kesselring, the German commander, made across Italy, right across the leg, to try and defend Allies getting into Rome. The major observation point was Monte Cassino itself, so it was bombed to smithereens, and then the Kiwis, I think it was the Free Polish armies, and then in turn the Indian or British Indian armies charged up the hill to try and capture it, and they were slaughtered in many, many thousands, and that's one of the reasons the Kiwis have, sadly, a greater mortality rate during Second World War per capita than, say, we Aussies. I think we Aussies might have lost something under 600 during Kokoda. They lost casualties of close to 1,000 in that particular battle. So, just a reminder, what's Monte Cassino? It's a place that is near and revered by the Kiwis. At age 14, a war broke out. Not uncommon in that part of the world, because remember, Italy was a series of city-states, and one would fight another, and the Pope wanted to control this and that. And so it spilled into the Abbey. He was moved to a university, Studium Generale, I'm not very good at Italian, please correct me, in Naples, and he learned Philosophy, first key point that's going to lead into some of his teaching. Learn philosophy of extra-biblical sources. Aristotle, Averroes, and Ananias. Again, please correct me if I get the pronunciation wrong. He was also introduced to the new Dominican order. At that time, remember this is the time of St. Francis of Assisi, or close to it as well, we're starting to get new orders arising in the Catholic Church. The Dominicans, the Black Friars, just on Prospect Road, you've probably seen Black Friars there. They favoured going out of the abbeys to teach people out into society, not to sit contemplating themselves inside the walls of a monastery. Unlike the older orders, as I say, placing emphasis on sanctity and status and not really going out to the people. He was attracted to them. At age 19, he joined the Dominicans, but his family was not happy. At his mother's direction, his brothers kidnapped him, locked him up for a year in the family castle. His brothers procured a prostitute to try and get him to break his vow of celibacy. Thomas scared her off with a fire poker. Now, I don't know about you, when I was being brought up as a young lad and taught at Sunday school, I remember being taught Psalm 119. How shall a young man keep his way pure? By taking heed according to thy word. It seems that Thomas hadn't read that scripture, so he used another means to keep himself pure. After a year, his mother gave up and let him escape secretly from his window to reduce the family scandal. In other words, she could say, he escaped, I don't know what happened to him, and he got away from them, and she wouldn't be blamed the fact that he had gone away. He went to Rome to meet the head of the Dominican order. At age 20, he went to study in the University of Paris under a Dominican teacher, Albertus Magnus. At age 23, he followed his professor to Cologne, even though the new Pope, listen to this, had offered to appoint him abbot of Monte Cassino as a Dominican. Now, that's a change. Remember, his uncle had already been abbot as he was growing up. His family, which was a Benedictine monastery at that stage, now the Pope himself, the head of the Catholic Church, is offering him as a 23-year-old to go back as the chief of Monte Cassino, as the abbot himself, as a 23-year-old. So that was a major turnaround. Obviously, he's already gaining some recognition within the Catholic Church. Because he was quiet, he didn't want to do that, so he stayed on at the university under his professor. Because he was quiet, the other students thought he was slow. But his professor said the following: you call him a dumb ox, but in his teaching he will one day produce such a bellowing that it will be heard throughout the world. His professor knew something. His professor could see something in his student that the other students couldn't see. By the age of 27, he returned to Paris from Cologne to complete his Master of Theology and become a lecturer. At age 31, he was appointed Regent Master of Theology and wrote against those who assail the worship of God and religion. Just notice getting to the point now where he's starting to do his writing in defence of aspects of religion. He's starting to become an apologist. This particular first work, or the work that I'm first quoting, was a defence of the orders that use the lifestyle of poverty, travel, and living in urban areas, much for purposes of reaching out. He's obviously that the Dominican order and its purpose had gripped him, and he was ready to defend it. He then wrote Disputed Questions on Truth, a response to 29 disputed questions on the aspects of faith and on the human condition. Again, note he's starting to be able to write and defend positions. He's being able to express his opinions, and he's starting to become what we would term an apologist. over a period of time, 59 through 65, he wrote one of his most famous works, Summa contra Gentiles. Again, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's written in 4 books to help Dominican missionaries in Spain convert Moors, that is Muslims, and Jews who were common in Spain at that time. Remember, about that time, we'd not had if we talk about the Moors, we had not the Conquistadora, the place, I guess, El Cid comes back. I think some of you may know history, but there was a time shortly after that when El Cid came and led Spanish armies to throw the Moors completely out of Spain. And of course, after that, I think it was under Isabel, the one who let Columbus go across to America, the Inquisition started. And of course, there was still, that was to happen later, so there's still quite a few Jews there before the Inquisition came. Is anyone here good at Latin? I'll tell you what the books actually are, and it'll help you. I'm sorry, I'm not a Latin expert, so if anyone can help me out, I'd be grateful. Possibly. I'll let you. The next slide's going to explain the outline of the book. I think you'll find that may give the context of what it actually means. So yeah, just symbols of the 3 major monotheistic faiths. Okay, it's written, as I say, in 4 books. And this becomes his style in the way he progresses. First of all, he argues the truth and reason of belief for a monotheistic God, which, of course, all 3 of those faiths would have accepted. Second, the second book starts on the creation by God. Again, it's common to each faith. Each faith has at least elements that they fully agree with in that. Book 3, providence, good, evil, fate, and relation of created beings to their maker. Again, something that all 3 major monotheistic faiths would agree largely in principle. So notice 3 of those books, the first 3 out of 4, he's building a bridge to those other faiths, between the faiths, and showing that they've got a lot in common. And then only at the end, the final book, he talks about the Christian distinctive. He talks about the Trinity, which of course is an anathema to both Muslims and Jews. Incarnation, the fact that Jesus, the God himself, came and was born again. I remember Christopher talking that from a point of view of an Orthodox person, Orthodox faith, what a wonderful concept that is, that God became man. The sacraments, and then the resurrection. Okay. Those, of course, are the elements that do distinguish it. So having 3 books brought the other 2 monotheistic faiths along with him, something they could more or less agree with, he then turns in the final book to show the distinctive. Now, I don't know how well that went over. I've not read how well that went over, but it was certainly a way that you bring others into a common theme until you then show the distinctive. And that certainly seems a powerful and persuasive way to present your case. Again, an apologist at work. And it introduces the main promise of Thomism. Thomism is a term of particular philosophy that is attributed to those who use his style. Thomism, truth is to be accepted no matter where it is found. I think it's a very profound statement as well, isn't it? Truth is to be accepted. I know I can be precious, saying, "Oh, why would I listen to him? He's off the hook. He's off the ball there or there." Truth is to be accepted, and sometimes people have truth that we perhaps don't fully recognise, but we should give them the credit, the courtesy to listen to what they say, because there may be truth there, and as we listen to them and give them that respect of listening to their truth, we may find that there's a way that we can link into that truth and say, yes, I agree with that. I have a slightly different perspective, but the truth is there, and acknowledge that they have found part of that truth. And I just had a thought, I've just added this slide probably in the last few days about others, you read about in the Bible, I'm sure you find other instances in history as well, who found truth outside, well, Torah, at that stage, these people around would have been the written word for the Hebrews anyway. We know that Rahab, the prostitute of Jericho, she'd heard about the crossing of the Red Sea, she'd heard about victories on the far side of the Jordan, but she had no aspects of the Bible, but she grasped something of the truth that she could see, and it led to her part, in fact, as genealogy. She's an ancestor of Jesus himself. Similarly, the wise men from the East. In New Testament times, we don't know how much they knew of the Hebrew Scriptures, but they obviously came to Jerusalem asking Herod, where is he that is born King of the Jews? They had an element of truth, and they grasped it and followed it. So we should always recognise there is truth out there, and some people have grasped the truth that we may not have seen, and we must remember and respect that they have grasped some of that truth. Then, back to Thomas. After finishing Contra Gentiles, he came back to Naples and he started lecturing to friars who could not attend university. Again, it's interesting to see then that, and this is the first of a number of times, or a couple of times at least, where you see the humility been coming out. Yes, remember he had already been offered to be in charge of the monastery at Monte Cassino. His own lecturer said this man is going to shape the world, but he is quite happy to teach those who haven't qualified for university. I think there's a measure of humility there. He wrote hymns, some of which are still in use today. By the age of 40, he is appointed the papal theologian. So certainly he has great recognition in the Catholic Church. The Dominicans asked him to set up a college in Santa Sabina, that was at one of the 7 Roman hills. There he starts his most famous work, Summa Theologica. Again, I'm not Latin. Sorry, folks, I'm not Latin speaker. That work suited to novice students. Again, his humility coming through. Because a doctor, it was to teach novice students, not just the really clever folks. Because a doctor of Catholic truth ought not only to teach the proficient, but to him who pertains also to instruct beginners. What a measure of humility there. So often those who start to rise in academic life want to rub shoulders with those who are known to be of equal stature, to rise with them, and perhaps don't condescend to lecture those who are undergraduates, or perhaps even those who may not even yet be in university. This is not the man that we're talking about here. And that's the picture of the monastery that he set up for the Dominicans in Rome. Well, this is an important document. In the Catholic literature, it's placed next to the Bible in authority. Secondly, all Catholic and even many Orthodox and Protestant seminaries either require or highly recommend its study for ordination. This is recognised well outside the Catholic Church, and it's certainly, I'm starting to have my eyes open to, okay, I read that book once, who is this guy? Well, I'm sorry, he has a high reputation throughout the church. First question coming in here is about the relation between theology, or sacred science, and philosophy, thus between faith and reason. And that's he's built that bridge. And that's why on the previous slide we saw that most of the Christian denominations have high regard for him, because he's built that bridge between the Greeks and the other philosophers, those who investigated reason, and theology. So we're going to look into what it's about. 3 parts: God's existence, nature, the creation of the world, angels, and the nature of man. Morality, including individual virtues and vices, And part 3, the person and work of Christ, who is the way of man to God, the sacraments, and the end of the world. Now I'm going to show you how he applied what I said before. Truth is to be found wherever, truth is to be taken for wherever it is found. He uses, I think it's about 12 lists. He talks in Summa Theologica, he uses the name the Apostle, talking about Paul. He talks the philosopher, Aristotle, who wrote most truth, philosophic truth to that time. He talks about the commentator, Ibn Rushd, an Arabic commentator on Aristotle. He talks about the master, Peter Lombard, an eminent theological writer. He talks about the theologian, Augustine, greatest theologian to that time. He talks about the jurist, Ulpian, a Roman writer on legal code, probably the one who worshipped Jupiter and the Roman gods. He talks about Cicero, Tully, who brought Greek philosophy to Latin readers. He talks about Avicenna, Ibn Sina, who is a Persian Aristotelian, Neoplatonic Islamic scholar, a guy who'd already tried to merge things in the past. He's borrowing from all of these, wherever the truth is found. He talks about Al-Ghazali and Al-Ghazi and Limistone. In fact, we were introduced to him as one of the guys that brought one of the from On Guard. That's right. We talked about him as bringing one of the. That's right. Yeah. So again, he talks about him, and finally he brings in a rabbi, a well-known Maimonides, probably 100 years or so before Thomas's time. He brings him in. So look, 10 people each from different trends of faith, from different backgrounds, within Europe and near the Middle East, all having a measure of truth, and Thomas is prepared to take the truth that they have found and draw them all together in his arguments. Truth is found in many places. Let's not forget that. Now, having set that up, that's the introduction to the 5 ways. So we're now going to talk about the 5 ways, which was the main topic given to me for our presentation. But hopefully I've painted you a picture of Thomas, the character, the fact of how he reached out. He was humble enough both to teach relatively junior students, but at the same time to take and read the thoughts of many who were before him, and from many from different cultures as well, to extract the truth that they had distilled from their studies. 5 ways, which I want to know, that's 5 ways. Oh, and sorry, by the way, just a reminder, I can't say too much because even though the whole of his Summa Theologica was 3,500 pages long, the 5 ways come out in only 2 pages. So I can't really go too much into there, so if I'm a little bit short at times as I go through these. Please remember it was only 2 pages out of the 3,500 page document. First one, the unmoved mover. Secondly, the first cause. Third, the argument from contingency. 4, the argument from a degree. And finally, the theological argument. Again, we've probably heard that one before, and some of those already over the last 2 or 3 years that we've been here having these meetings. The unmoved mover. In the world, we can see that at least some things are changing. Whatever is changing is being changed by something else. If that by which it is changing is itself changed, then it too is being changed by something else. See a sequence going on here? But this change cannot be infinitely long, so there must be something that causes change without itself changing. There must be a starting point. This, everyone understands to be God. Now there, of course, there'll be some who would stand up and immediately protest, but that's the deductions of the first argument. The unmoved mover. The term motion, this is an explanation of what we've just looked at. The term motion means any kind of change, and more specifically, a transit from potential to actuality. It's not necessarily a time sequence. Since potential does not yet exist, it cannot cause itself to exist and can therefore only be brought into existence by something already existing. And in fact, I've probably already got into that argument when I was talking about the first paragraph here. Argues that a causal change cannot be infinitely long. His argument is that a chain of concurrent effects must be rooted ultimately in a cause capable of generating these effects, and hence for a cause that is first in the hierarchical sense, not the temporal sense. Get that distinction? We're talking about things that have come into place, not necessarily a sequence of time series, but rather in a sense of order of descent, but not necessarily time. His concept has minimal content by the end of the argument, which he fleshes out through the rest of his major work. And again, I apologise, but remember, only 2 pages are given to these 5, so you've got to believe that a lot of the extra arguments follow in the following 3,498 pages.
Does this come right at the start of this?
I believe it does. I believe it does. I haven't read the 3,500 pages. I apologise. I stand to be corrected. I invite you to read all of it, please, and tell me. Okay, now we're going to get... Yes, homework. Yeah, very good. Yes. Okay, so now I've left you with the first of the 5 ways. Now I'm going into the second of the 5 ways. In the world, we can see that things are caused. But it's not possible for something to be the cause of itself, because it would entail that it exists prior to itself, which is a contradiction. If that by which it is caused is itself caused, then it too must have a cause. This cannot be infinitely long chain, so therefore there must be a cause which is not itself caused by anything further. Ba-boom. Same statement as at the bottom of the first way. So again, I can see atheists rising, their hackles are rising for that last clause there. Now let me explain this a bit further. The causes Aquinas has in mind are not sequential events, but rather simultaneous existing dependencies, symbiotic relationships. For example, plant growth depends on sunlight, which depends on gravity, which depends on mass. And I'm sure that there'll be other ones you could think of as well, symbiotic relationships. So he's not talking necessarily sequential things, but things that all depend on each other for their existence. Aquinas is not arguing for a cause that is first, but in fact I've said that before really, a principal cause rather than a derivative cause. Okay, that's the first of the two of the ways. I would rather go back, if I don't mind. I'll go right towards the end, and I'll point out some of the arguments. I think you raised that when you were reviewing it. Where do we see the contra-arguments, and how have people responded to the arguments? So if you don't mind, I will ask you to wait just a few more slides when we get into for instance, what Dawkins says or Hume says, and then the counter-arguments against their arguments. And you've got to recognise, even as I've just said now, some of the most eminent atheists, David Hume, Richard Dawkins, etc., have certainly had a go at him, because he's such a foundational character, and his work is such a foundational character. In the world, we see things that are possible to be and possible not to be. In other words, perishable things. But if everything were contingent and thus capable of going out of existence, then, given infinite time, this possibly would be realised and nothing would exist now. In other words, if things keep perishing, ultimately everything would disappear. But things clearly do exist now. Therefore, there must be something that is imperishable, a necessary being. Garang, again, you've seen that one before, haven't you? The argument begins with the observation that things around us come into and go out of existence. Animals die, buildings are destroyed, and so forth. But everything were like this, then assuming an infinite past, all possibilities would be realised and everything would go out of existence. But this is not the case. Therefore, there must be at least one thing that does not have the possibility of going out of existence. Fourth way. We see things in the world that vary in degrees of goodness, truth, nobility, etc. For example, sick animals and healthy animals, as well as well-drawn circles and poorly drawn circles. But judging something as being more or less implies some standard against which it can be judged. Therefore, there is something which is goodness itself, perfect itself if you like, and you've got it. There we are, right at the bottom. And this, everyone understands, is God. In some clarifications here. The argument is rooted in Aristotle and Plato, but its developed form is found in Anselm's Monologian. And I'm sorry, I've not read that. I'm just quoting. Although the argument has Platonic influences, Aquinas was not a Platonist, Platonist, that's right, and did not believe in the theory of forms. Again, I'm sorry, I don't know what that means, but the point taken, Aquinas was not necessarily following the logic from which it was necessarily derived. Rather, he's arguing that things that only have a partial flawed existence indicate they are not their own sources of existence, and so must rely on something else as the source. They are only pale, imperfect reflections of something that is better, if I may paraphrase that. Finally, the teleological argument, the fifth way, we see various non-intelligent objects in the world behaving in regular ways. This cannot be due to chance, since they would not behave with predictable results. So their behaviour must be set. But it cannot be set by themselves, since they are non-intelligent and have no notion of how to set behaviour. Therefore, their behaviour must be set by something else, and by implication, that something must be intelligent. Okay, there you go. There it appears again. Every time we come to the same conclusion. The fifth way depends on the concept of Aristotle's four causes. The efficient cause. A complete explanation of an object will involve knowledge of how it came to be. In the case of a statue, it is the person chiselling away which transform a block of marble into a statue. It depends, the second of Aristotle's causes, the material cause, the nature of the object's material. Fire carries things upwards, unless stopped from doing so. Things like beds and cloaks formed by a human artifice have no innate material tendency to become beds or cloaks. Something intelligent has to do it. The material itself does not have that. There's something beyond the material that makes it. The formal cause. Aristotle admits this is a difficult concept associated with metaphysical purposes, pattern or form. And I don't propose to go too much into this one. The function of humans in our world is to imitate the ideal world as much as possible, which importantly includes imitating the good, that is, acting morally. So there is another cause that Aristotle dwelt on. The final cause, the specific behaviours associated with the type of thing it is. Acorns regularly develop into oak trees, but never into sea lions. The oak tree is the end towards which the acorn points. Its disposition. Even if it fails to achieve maturity, we knew that it was always, if possible, destined to be an oak tree. So those are the causes behind the teleological argument. We see the design, if you like, as an evidence of God. Now, criticism of the three proofs, and this is where you may join in the criticism. Immanuel Kant argued that our minds is structured the raw materials of reality, and that the world is therefore divided into a phenomenal world, the world we experience, and the noumenal world, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, the world as is in itself, which we can never know. So there are ways that our perception of the world may bias the way that we look at things, and may therefore add some breakage points in the logic that was put forward by Thomas. Since the cosmological arguments reason from what we experience, in fact, this is what was actually trying to come out, I shouldn't have jumped ahead. Since cosmological arguments reason from what we experience to an inferred cause, and hence the noumenal world, since the noumenal world lies beyond our knowledge, we can never know what's there. Okay, criticism of the first 3 points. I'm just going to run these with the unmoved mover, the first cause, and the argument for contingency. So back to what Kant said. In fact, I'll just go back a little bit there, just summarising. He is really saying there is part of the things that we don't experience, and therefore the way Thomas joined up the sequence of things doesn't necessarily give the full explanation, because there's things in the inferred cause that we just don't know about. Therefore, there may be points that therefore are beyond explanation, that in fact give the lie to some of what Thomas' arguments were. Now go back to the first 3 points. We now talk to David Hume. David Hume argued that since we can conceive of causes and effects as separate, there is no necessary connection between them, and therefore we cannot necessarily reason from an observed effect to an inferred cause. Hume also argued that explaining the causes of individual elements explains everything, and therefore there is no need for a cause of the whole of reality. Now let's go to the defence of the 5 ways. 20th century philosopher of religion, Richard Swinburne, argues in his book Simplicity is the Evidence of Truth that these criticisms are only strong when collected together, and that individually each of them is weak. Another philosopher, Edward Fesser, who's a Thomistic, in other words a defender, has argued in his book Aquinas, A Beginner's Guide, that Dawkins, Hume, Kant and most modern philosophers do not have a correct understanding of Aquinas at all. That Aquinas' arguments are often difficult to translate in modern terms. And I think we have to acknowledge that there is a paradigm shift through history. And just as there is in philosophy, we have a different mindset that does change our perception of what we are thinking. In fact, it was actually a week or two ago, I heard someone who tries to translate languages, or tries to convey it's the Bible into people groups who have a different language. And he said there's a real difference between people who have a written vocabulary and those who have no written vocabulary. You can say something to a person who doesn't have vocabulary and they have a different paradigm at all from those of us who have a written vocabularies. There is a distinction. And so it is through history. I argue, go back to the King James Bible, or go back to some of Shakespeare's works, read them, and you'll find the understanding, the very words they're using have changed over just 500 years, or 400 years in that case. So we do find that modern day philosophers have got to be very careful that they not only set themselves against the work, but try and understand the paradigm and the way of thinking that was relevant in this case 1,200, 800 years ago. People did think differently then, so you've got to read what Thomas wrote in the context of what it was 800 years ago. Eastern Orthodox theologian David Bentley Hart says that Dawkins devoted several pages of the God delusion to discussion of the 5 ways of Thomas, but never thought to avail himself of the services of some scholars of ancient and medieval thought who might have explained them to him. As a result, he not only mistook the 5 ways for Thomas's comprehensive statement on why we should believe in God, which they most definitely are not, but ended up completely misrepresenting the logic of every single one of them at the most basic level. Richard Dawkins, building a straw man. Hasn't he done that before? He's pretty good at building straw men, I think. He obviously tried to do it for Dawkins, ignorantly or perhaps deliberately, I don't know. Not knowing that scholastic distinction between primary and secondary causality, for instance, Dawkins imagined that Thomas's talk of a first cause referred to the initial temporal causal agency and a continuous temporal series of discrete causes. Now remember, about 10 slides ago, I specifically emphasised it wasn't temporal. It was hierarchical. Dawkins didn't read deeply enough to pick that up. Now, you can read that. He thought Thomas' logic requires the universe to have a temporal beginning, which Thomas explicitly and repeatedly made clear is not the case. He anachronistically mistook Thomas's arguments from universal natural theology for an argument from apparent intelligent design in nature. He thought Thomas's proof from universal motion concerned only physical movement in space, local motion, rather than ontological movement for potency to act. Again, not grasping the philosophical intent behind the words that Thomas was using. He mistook Thomas' argument from degrees of transcendental perfection for an argument from degrees of quantitative magnitude, which by definition have no perfect sum. And really these last two are a bit difficult for modern persons, but he might have asked all the same. So if you're going to start attacking someone from a few hundred years ago, please make sure you understand the logic, the paradigm that they were in those times. Otherwise, you're bringing your own subjective framework to judge someone else. Be careful. Final slide. Yes, we're not doing badly. In 1274, aged 49, he was riding a donkey to Lyon to attend a council for reunification of the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. In fact, that was good. That's where I remember Christopher reminded us of when we were doing the Nicene Creed. Remember the great tragedy, if I may say, when the words of the Nicene Creed were changed and it caused the great split, the great division between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church, which exists to this day, and well, sadly, probably in the Crusades led to the slaughtering of those in Constantinople. And so it has been a great tragedy in Christendom that existed. Well, there was an attempt to try and fix it, and Thomas was going to be part of that. But he struck his head on the branch of a fallen tree. He fell seriously ill, and as he received his last rites, he said, "I receive thee, ransom of my soul. For love of thee have I studied and kept vigil, toiled, preached, and taught." I have to say that having held my hand up to do this study, yes, I grasped a degree of the great thought, the great wisdom, the great openness that Thomas had to the thoughts that had already gone before, a humility there. But truly the thing that has grasped me probably is summed up in his dying words. This was a man who had a faith, a man who was humble, and to me, can I say, as much as his teaching has impressed me, it's his character that truly has gripped me as I was able to prepare a study on Thomas. So thank you.
Okay, we'll proceed. I just wouldn't mind just going through some of these arguments and kind of analyse them for ourselves and see what we actually think of them. And so this one's the Unmoved Mover. In the world we can see that at least some things are changing. We'd all agree with that, wouldn't we? Whatever is changing is being changed by something else. Make sense? Yeah. If that which is changing is itself changed, then it too is being changed by something else. Now, this is where I have problems. But this chain cannot be infinitely long. So there must be something that causes change without itself changing. So, why how can you justify that statement that this chain cannot be infinitely long?
Let's flip to the next slide to understand what it is that we're talking about here, because
any kind of, and more specifically, transit from potential to actuality. I just want to grasp that. We're not talking about a time series, we're talking about a series of potentialities actuating, so it could be almost instantaneous.
What's potentiality and actuality actually mean?
Well, let me just go on here. It's more a causal change. The change from current fix must be root ultimately cause capital generating these. There's a lot of technical sense.
I've heard William Lane Craig describe it, if I can get this right, as more, think of the cogs in a watch or something like that. So one cog turns another cog, turns another cog, and it's more that sort of thing. So it's not,
but they're all turning at the same time.
So they might all be turning at the same time. So that's just one illustration. I don't know that it's comprehensive, but that's another way to think about it. So rather than 5 balls on the swinging thing, one bumps and then 2 and 2. But rather than that, A pushes B, B pushes C. This is and one happens after the other. This is more like, think of a watch hand turning where it's all happening at the same time.
No, it's not. The gears go in, mesh like that, and they come out. And so it's not in, it's in, and then the next one comes. But it's a different force, it's a different part of the machine.
Think of it as turning a handle, and one is actually, it's all happening, it's all turning at the same time and all moving, right?
But one is dependent on the other.
But it's not, but one is caused to move by another one. It can be at the same time. I mean, it's just an illustration of William Lane Craig. I don't know if I'm using it.
But anyway, whether it's temporal or dependency, he makes a statement that this cannot go on forever. But this chain cannot be infinitely long. He says it several times.
Yes.
What is wrong with an infinite chain?
You can't realise an absolute infinity, because otherwise you'd never be here. You never get to this cause. It's like trying to jump out of a pond as well.
That argument doesn't work either.
It's sort of lying.
Well, why does it work?
Well, because
well, I mean, once it's arguing, I mean, it's just simply, I'm not arguing to be argumentative.
No.
It's simply, I think that argument is just as weak as.
Well, I think it's contrary to Newton's first law of motion. If you throw something and there's no friction on it, it goes on forever.
No, but that's. Now we're getting into entropy and things are winding down.
Infinity doesn't exist. Something can move without something actually moving.
It doesn't exist. That's right.
Yeah, actually, it's something that can go on forever, but it's forever before anything comes. And so it's almost finite. So if something goes on indefinitely, it's always finite. Yeah.
No, you can't have. So you can have a forward infinity, but you can't have a past infinity.
Well, you never reach it.
Because you never reach it, so you can't have an actual infinity.
Yeah,
That's
because if you,
I'm not understanding what's the argument against that?
So this is an infinity of causes rather than
Time, if we're all using time-based things because that's what we can relate to.
Yeah.
And I'm saying I have trouble by the same token of the beginning, because what existed before the beginning. That's just as big a problem to me as the other argument.
So no, this is actually, so William Lane Craig puts it better. He's actually simplified some of these things and modernised them, as did Leibniz and co. Essentially they posit an unmoved mover, an uncaused cause. And it goes back to the fact that you can't actually have an absolute infinite, because you'd have never got to the point where we're actually living and breathing as the causes that actually caused us, because there would always be an infinite amount of causes before our parents ever got to do this, before evolution ever started, before the cosmos ever started. You had evolution, you have an infinite cause of causes.
But see, but then explain the beginning there's an absolute beginning. Explain that concept to me, and then you've got it. But without explaining what an absolute beginning would be, the other argument doesn't make much sense. Neither argument make much sense to me. But that's what I'm saying.
That's where what's being posited is an uncaused cause, and that uncaused cause is what we're calling God. And again, looking like Craig is out, but it's spaceless, timeless, immaterial. Why do we say that? Well, because of the Big Bang, right? So you've either got to posit that, or you've got to posit the material, be it multiverse or whatever, is infinite. Again, how did we get to the day? Right? Because you can't get to the day if the universe is infinite, right? You could never get to Carl Sagan, because no matter where you start, there's an infinite amount of time before your starting point. You never get to that point. So what's being posited here is exactly the same. Is that there actually is no such thing as an infinite series of causes. Therefore, there has to be an immaterial, uncaused, right, spaceless, timeless entity. And what Aquinas is positing here is that that's what we understand by God. And the fact that our science shows us that there is a beginning, maybe there's one or more, but we're an infinite amount. But the fact that there is a beginning seems to support Aquinas.
I agree. I'm not arguing, but I'm only arguing that the idea of the beginning doesn't do with
it's something that we can analyse and comprehend, because the idea of time, no time, just doesn't fit in our brains.
Yeah, that's true.
Time has a beginning. This isn't specifically talking about time anyway.
No, it's not. It's to talk about dependency. He's saying, he just makes a statement, cannot go on forever.
You can't, looking at infinity of
you can't have any infinity. He's saying you can't have any infinity. Whether it's temporal or dependencies or anything.
But actual infinity can't, and you can't have a past actual infinity. And in fact, you can never actually have an actual infinity. You can tend to. We all drew the graphs that tended towards infinity in school, right? They're tending to it. It's a notion, but it's not something you can actually ever realise.
He just doesn't justify that statement, does it? So
He might have been 3,000 word pages.
I don't know. Yes, I'm not sure whether he does.
No.
I've never read those.
Well, if he's put it from causality, you would think that he was. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. If he's from zero, then you would think that he actually is. Yeah. That he was something.
Exactly, yes, and that is the beauty of Thomas, is he wasn't all his own original work. He borrowed from, you saw the 10 names I put up there, he borrowed from lots of sources, very renowned sources too.
Another question on that particular one, though. What's to say you can't have A affect B, affect C, affect A?
that does not define.
If you go to the next page, then it says, it talks about potential. The potential does not yet exist. It cannot cause itself to exist and can therefore only be brought into existence by something already existing. So if you had a circle, then you'd actually have to break that rule.
And it's like
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, why can't that circle be the original uncaused cause? So I expect because still causing itself.
In physical terms, you can't do that. Because the world is changing so that you can't go backwards. Because you're using the potential is being spread out into other things, and to reassemble them is incredible. It's theoretically possible, but it will take you infinity time to do it.
Must be something more philosophical.
Well, no, that's a physical truth.
Well, that's in dispute, though, right? Whether you could actually, because when you look at the information loss of black holes, and there's a big dispute.
We're talking not about that. We're talking about things going down. The fact you can't have perpetual motion. Okay. So when heat goes from a cold body, you can't put back in true. It doesn't go naturally the other way.
Once we got to this point, though, it reminded me of the discussion a few meetings ago about Trinity or the sonship of Christ or something. I forget now. And I wish that I'd known Aquinas to put this so the second person of the Trinity is known as the Son of God. It's not in the temporal sense, it's in a hierarchical sense. And so this is useful to know when you think about Trinity.
Yeah, there's hierarchy around the temple.
Yes.
Talking about John. Listen.
Okay. What is a temporal set? What is a temporal?
It is around there isn't. Oh, right, okay.
I'm lost because I don't understand the term.
Time, referring to time. Temporal means anything referring to time. Well, it's something that is before another thing.
There was hierarchy.
There was hierarchy.
Status. I'm first. The first minister is the prime minister. The first among equals is president or something of the United States or something like that. So it's first as in the most important or the leader.
That work with ball setting each other.
I think it's, I'm looking at the watch thing then comes if I'm going to say, well, the watch and simile, which given is, I think, better than the ball one, because you can actually see a ball, there's a time sequence there.
Yes.
Whereas in a sense, all I guess it's the second hand or whatever is going around, is being driven concurrently by a series of cogs. So they're all acting together, albeit something put that watch together so they can act concurrently. And there's there's an initial cause, but I guess in hindsight, yes, someone deliberately put time, in a series of time put the watch together. But we see it in operation. It's very hard to say what is the actual time sequence that's now operating, because they're all going around together. And I know that's a concept hard, but may I say, the thing, because it relates to me, I think we are all biased in the post-Newton world to always think much more about velocity, distance over time, and have a real sense of the importance of time in our minds. It's just the way we've been brought up.
Well,
This guy lived before Newton, before all those equations, and therefore I'm thinking that they have lived in a different paradigm. His idea of a concept of a hierarchical sense may be a bit fine for us to grasp, albeit with some illustrations. And that's why Dawkins probably went so much into the temporal side of things, without grasping that they had a different mindset back in those days.
So surely, if they had a different mindset and they have language, surely whatever their mindset might be can be expressed in language that we would understand.
If you have a
So why don't we go back and write them out again in a way we can understand?
Okay, you're right.
Like a chain is a kind of a hierarchy. Like if you've got something on the end of the chain that's filled up, then one link's connected to another, but they're not temporarily connected. Yeah. So they're just like one links to the next link, but there's nothing associated with time.
What's the cause and effect of? That's one.
Well, this is not about cause and effect.
It's really about it's emotion.
Oh, it's about changing.
The chain doesn't change, does it? As long as you've got the chain all together, it's not changing.
What does he mean by
Yeah, that's not changing, but it's kind of a hierarchical relationship rather than temporal relationship.
If you see the thing on the end stationary and that moves, well that moved because the link above it moved.
Yeah, but that's
That moved because the link above it moved.
That happens in time, doesn't it?
So
No, that's not time.
Let me go back to these original statements.
And these are
Emotion, please.
Oh, sorry, next one?
No, the unmoved, the non-certain, what he said rather than the explanation.
This is his words. That's his words.
Here's one number 2.
Oh, you want to go to number
Number 2, yeah.
Oh, sorry,
His words, sorry. Number 2. First 2. This is what I'm
You are right, yes, they are related, yes.
So,
In the end of it, he says this everybody understands is God. it's sort of a little bit of a cheat, isn't it? Because we're saying the first cause, where's the first cause? Oh, here's God, but he's outside of everything, and he doesn't change, and he's this and that and the other. You don't have a handle on where you're effectively not allowed to answer that question.
Well, you're saying it's a big jump.
I'm saying it's a cheat. Because it's cause and effect, one after the other, and we think we'll go back, then we get to a point where we say, well, where's the first cause? Oh, we got it. That's God. He's always there.
Thomas wasn't trying to prove it, demonstrating what God has done.
That's right, and
I'm sorry.
in the context too, sorry, I've got now, but let's just speak this now. Steve, sorry. You made a point that this Aquinas wrote 3 books about the things that the 3 monotheistic debates had in common, which is the everyone in the seasons, I believe, and then finally got to the things that set Christianity apart. So I think that when Aquinas wrote this everyone understands to be God, I think he was referring to Muslims and Christians and Jews understand that this is God.
Yeah.
He's not saying, thus I have proved there's God. He's saying, this is the one, this is the thing, whatever the word is, that everyone understands to be God. It's just a statement of an agreement, I think, rather than trying to prove yes there is or there isn't.
I thought at the beginning this is these are the arguments for the existence of God.
No, and that's what I said a minute ago. He's not trying to prove there is a God. He's just trying to prove what do people think God is.
No, but on the slide, it said.
Can I
Well, let's go back.
my interpretation of that is that the analogy that I think that's not going back to what you're saying, it's more clear. The person being the internet, it didn't exist. Okay? And then now it's growing in this causes and what we're doing now. So the internet was the thought, was the actual start. The same goes as the person starting being robots. And or computing, or whatever. That didn't exist before now. That's where he's talking about the hierarchy rather than
Yes, physically.
it's not a physical hierarchy, not a time. We're still stuck in the time. He's talking about physical hierarchies.
I think he's
You created something, but then it has other effects.
I think each of Dawkins is showing the necessity of God as the explanation for things. But it's not you know, I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs of these arguments. And they all sort of have a limitation, because you end up with, God's necessary to explain how anything came to be, something, that's true. But you don't end up with the continuous of God.
No, that's not the rest of the book.
No, that's right. That's right.
There's 400 rolled-out pages now to demonstrate that.
And why it should be a person in the first place.
That's right, you don't get to personal God. You just get to a philosophical necessity. That's what it is. God is a philosophical necessity. And it doesn't get you to, well, he's a good God, and he's a personal God, and he's the Father of Jesus Christ, and he's revealed himself to God, or he's, all those things. You don't get to that. You can't.
But Steve pointed that out. It started with, hang on, these are the 3 phases of these, and you establish first a beginning and a creator, and that gives you a logical foundation to say, well, okay, what's the nature of this creator like? You actually get to the point where he's got to be uncaused, therefore he's got to be a necessary being.
Yeah, he just contributes something, but there's no one paradigm that will give you an answer. So if every paradigm you think of is incomplete, unless it's incomplete too.
That's right.
It contributes.
It's got some value.
I was just reading that 3,500 pages, he didn't actually complete what he planned to do.
Yes.
He died before it was finished.
Oh,
Really?
did he? Okay.
Yeah. Well, we don't always say that.
I just realised this proves that I'm wrong. And I'm saying it's not about proving the existence of God, but up there it said 5 ways of proving the existence of God. Maybe that means something different by proof. Seriously, proof used to be test, but it used to be testing rather than demonstrating.
This is a philosophical proof.
Yeah, it's not like trying to convince an atheist to be a theist.
Yes, it is.
Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and this is exactly,
These are some of the arguments that Gutenberg Craig uses, and he's modernised them, right? And it's absolutely the way these philosophical arguments as well as the scientific arguments are absolutely designed to go, hang on, consider the evidence and go where the evidence leads.
But atheists managed to read all this and go, yeah, but I still don't believe.
Absolutely.
And in Thomas's time, everyone was assumed to believe in God.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Stephen, you had a really interesting slide on just that point, where I thought it was really interesting because I think it was in the introduction of the Summa Summa Contra. Yes, in that title, to go back, it's basically to try and prove arguments. One more, is it?
No, I think we just passed it.
Yeah.
Did we pass it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No.
Yeah.
Or just on.
Take that one.
Yeah.
One argues truth and reason for belief in one, because God comes forth.
Yes.
There was another slide which actually said that he was against those who were trying to
He voted against those who were so right?
Yeah,
That's it. Where was that? Because that's exactly it.
Yeah. Most people
Meaning that there are a hell of a lot of ideas then, right?
Well, not necessarily atheists, but people who didn't know, they just think about
Yeah, this is more against the older orders who are, I mean, you can put a good title on it that catches people's attention, but really he was defending the Dominican and the, if you like, the poverty, or the orders who actually went out and did something for the people. He was defending them rather than those who said, look, don't care about the masses, I'm okay, what are you, Jack, sort of thing. And that was, he was attacking them, and you know, probably put a catchy thing, because he said those who sit in their ivory towers are really not religious after all. Really, those who go out and try to do something for the world are real religion.
Well, on here, with this something extremely interesting. The Summa Contra Gentiles, also known as Liberate Catholic, book on the truth of the Catholic faith against the error of the unbelievers. That's unbelievers. So whether the unbelievers means unbelievers in the monotheistic God, or unbelievers in the Christian God, I would be really interested to know.
We think we're Gentiles, but they went out to the Gentiles.
I'm not a Gentile.
No, we think of ourselves as
non-Jewish.
non-Jewish, which means Gentiles to us, but it actually means Jewish, means unbelievers.
It means nations. And in the Old Testament, if you read the nations list and the nations of that, they're all the other guys that aren't Jews. And we're now engrafted into the people of God, so we're not honorary Jews. Whether we're
No, I'm not saying that. I was trying to find out the meaning of the word Gentile.
Yeah, so they're not Gentiles.
No, sorry, in the original sense.
Yes.
Everything else, we tend to think of ourselves as Gentiles.
Yeah.
Which is actually unbelievable.
So I guess it's just a definition of unbelievable, but that just means the Jews and the
Are we on something?
Here we are.
When we go on to the third argument,
It'd be interesting to know what opposing views were there at the time and whether they were articulated very much.
that was my point,
yeah, who were his enemies?
We know he's locked up by his mum because he wanted to become a Dominican. You want to be locked up in a cloister and, not just not the family home.
How serious is that one? You wrote some hints still in use today. Would we know any of those?
I've not looked them up, no.
I haven't seen his name in actually looked it up.
But I suspect it being
Well, Tom will look at that.
Probably
by
Actually,
Thomas
I know we've got France as Assisi here.
Yes.
All preachers they go on Kings.
Yes.
Originally from France as Assisi, his contemporary words.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know
Are they the words or the music?
No,
just the words.
No, this is 20th century.
Right, okay.
We just look at number 2. I was interested in number 2. Just a moment.
Because I reckon he thinks that the light falls down from the sun onto the earth. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, sorry. That's the argument here. Planes go depend on sunlight, depends on gravity.
Yeah, it depends on gravity.
Okay, the compression of the sun by gravity.
No. He says, for example, the growth of plants depends on sunlight, and the sunlight depends on gravity.
It's made by gravity within the sun.
But that's
Why are you saying that the sunlight's falling down to the earth?
I don't think he meant that. I mean, this is illustrating, that's not him. This is someone illustrating his meaning, and I suspect that someone's talking about gravitational pressure in the sun that is forcing it.
But that's someone else's words, not mine.
Yeah, this is an illustration by someone.
I wasn't actually having a go at him. It was just a novel way of thinking.
Of course.
Sunlight falling in.
So, yeah,
They would think that.
every second slide, every explanation part of it, the second part of each of these is someone else's clarification of what he meant.
Steve, I thought that little insight was from you because you're a physicist. Because I know just enough physics to know that it's exactly right. Right, and it's like comes from gravity, which is depending on us. And I thought, well, let me see. So it wasn't you.
No.
She's beginning to think we're smart.
I'm sorry.
This is like using mass behaves like the way it's on to sunlight and that's like
Alright, the argument will continue. In the world we see things that are possible to be, possible not to be. In other words, perishable things. Right, so that means contingent beings. If everything were contingent and thus happen to go out of existence, then given a time, this possibility would be realised and nothing would exist now. But things clearly do exist now, therefore there must be something that is imperishable, a necessary being. So he's saying because things go into existence and out of existence, and if it was infinite time, there'd be nothing existing.
Yeah.
So what do you think about it?
Well, physicists would disagree. There's a single zero-point energy which only exists in anyway in rubbish.
It doesn't go out of existence. It decomposes, and what if an animal or something died, it decomposes, but all the atoms are still there. There's nothing's gone out of existence. With the sunlight, that gives it the energy to form again. So it's really like what they're saying, that is A, B, C, and that's it.
So you're saying, Bill, so you're saying that when your atoms go out of existence and they become rocks or something somewhere in the atmosphere,
Well, they go back and make another
that
person.
Bill is still in existence?
No.
Yeah, but
Bill goes out of existence.
But it's not never been in existence in the sense that
you get as things go into existence and out of existence. So it was infinite in time, then everything would go out of existence, so nothing exists. But does that actually make sense? Because you could have an infinite number of things going into existence and out of existence.
Well, no, then you come across the infinity problem again.
Yeah.
And in accelerating the universe, we know that we're going to end up in a heap universe, right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about his
argument.
On his terms, does that argument make sense?
I think it makes more sense in the 21st century than it did back in the 12th or 13th.
Well, the centuries will take their thermodynamics.
Yeah.
What can we suggest the explanation of?
So what would go out of existence? What are we talking about? No, but that's
Like us. We come into this and we go out of it.
but then they come back into existence. As the result.
So that children come into existence.
Adam's not last forever. That's true too. You know, I am not sure.
Yeah.
Like wishing it shouldn't wish
Yeah, like here, the argument begins with the observation that things around us come into and go out of existence, animals die, buildings are destroyed, etc.
that's going out of existence.
But if everything were like this, then assuming the infinite past, all possibilities would be realised and everything would go out of existence.
That's the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Since this is clearly not the case, then there must be at least one thing that does not have the possibility of going out of existence. But if you look at animals, like it says here, animals die, But also animals are more. Yeah. So,
on the surface, that's a fairly weak argument. The tenant is coming and going.
It doesn't work these days. Since people started believing in the Big Bang Theory and stuff like that, and zero gravity, that one just doesn't.
It doesn't look like we've opened, but I imagine when we thought it all through, it made more sense when we explained it to us and we made more sense.
Yes to it. This is not his words, these are the words of someone who's showing us illustration.
there's a first
That is his argument there. So please, yeah, that's his word.
So again, William Lane Craig's is much easier to reconcile. So William Lane Craig's on this because he's done all the work to bring it up to date. So it's so much easier.
Yeah, these things that had a start, they had to bring something before, didn't they?
Yes.
Things that come in
the substance that is not outside this physical universe, actually in spiritual world, we create this universe. And the second law of thermodynamism, it does actually work with creatures. We know that they were created perfect in Genesis chapter 1. But as time gone by, we're breaking down. And every generation, there's something like 200 extra errors in the gene sequencing or in the double helix business that, it's when they come together. And although that sounds a lot, there's a million plus in the actual helix. So, but even so, you get, like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. So with each generation, there's more and more chances that if you pair off with a cousin, even let alone brother or a sister, like they did in Abraham's day, you're going to finish up with not all their children or all sorts of problems at birth or miscarriages or abortions or whatever. That's probably why we're getting more and more cancers, and we're breaking down. The race will eventually be unviable, and so all animal species will be. Everything breaks down at the time.
Okay, shall we move on to the next one? The argument in degree. We see things in the world that vary in degrees of goodness, truth, nobility, etc. For example, sick animals are healthy animals, and well-drawn circles as well as poorly drawn ones. But judging something as being more or less implies some standard against which it is being judged. Therefore, there is something which is goodness itself, as everyone understands itself to be the
how good something is, like an animal or a circle, you can decide your criteria about a specific kind of thing, and you don't need to have a guide for different things for you to be able to create some standard for it to describe them as good or not.
What should there be a standard? Otherwise, everything just is, and that's just how it is.
Well, you can always say the circle perfect without necessarily.
Why should there actually be a standard where you can say it's perfect?
Yeah, what's the content? Where do you derive your idea of perfect unless or imperfect?
Well, that's the definition of what a circle is.
Yes. What's the definition of a circle?
We're a circle.
It's got a constant range of rows.
Yes. So that, so you're saying it doesn't mean...
It doesn't have to be a line circle, but it's generous and kind of figure.
They would not.
They would come.
The argument is rooted in Aristotle and Plato, but it's not always found in Anderson. Although the argument has Platonic influences and Aristotle and Plato did not believe in the theory forms, Ryan is arguing that things that only have partial or flawed existence indicate they are not their own source of existence, so much reliance on the source of their existence. I can actually understand that.
So Platonist and William Lane Craig is somebody who believes abstract objects, things like virtue or valor or courage actually exist. Like the number 7, because the number 7 actually exists. And so a Platonist actually believes that those abstract entities actually exist in some realm outside of human minds. They actually.
There's a realm of perfection which has led into in this world of topics.
Well, he's saying that Aquinas wasn't a Platonist, but that's not just saying what a Platonist actually is. He believes that the world of abstract objects actually exists independent of human minds. We'll still read the rest of it, it's just a definition.
Rather than studying philosophy formally, I think Plato, the time philosophy said there was a template of a table in heaven, for want of a better word, that defined that, this is not a table, that is a table, because you can compare it with this ideal thing which is a table. So that was, I think, comparing like a template. And they were called ideals, I think.
That's a form, that's the theory.
For everything, not just numbers and virtues, but for physical things as well. As far as I know, that is a board, that is a screen.
Hang on, does this argument make sense, or something? You like it? All right, what do you like?
Well, it's kind of like argument from morality as well. It says there is an absolute standard. Because if there is not an absolute standard, then everything is relative and nothing is either good or bad. It's just what they think at the time. So if somebody is born blind and unable to see, unless you have an absolute standard that says that having sight is how you're supposed to be, then that's neither here nor there. And so there has to be some sort of absolute standard. And an absolute standard has to come from somewhere.
This is similar to the moral.
That's what I said,
So how do you know lines bend unless you actually have a straight line inherited?
Yes, the idea of good and evil. Yes. So their forms, in a sense, like I said, it's an idea that's no sort of thing.
Those functions whereby we can identify what's within.
Yeah, so we've also got the idea of love and hate. So that's the end. That's what I think it's arguing that we use the word love quite a lot. God is love. So that's a form as well as good.
Why should love be good?
Well, is it? Yeah. But in many ways, so are they absolute? Is love an absolute thing? So we're saying that love, good and evil are absolute. They're a form or an idea, but we're not saying. But he's saying that love and hate is not an absolute.
I don't think he's saying that.
Well, he doesn't believe in forms. That's what he's saying.
Right, shall we go to the teleological? So we see there is non-intelligent objects in the world behaving in regular ways. This cannot be due to chance, since they not behave in result. So their behaviour must be set. But it cannot be set by themselves, since they are non-intelligent, have no notion of how to set behaviour. Therefore, their behaviour must be set by something else, and by implication, something that must be intelligent, as everyone understands in God. So,
So we're talking about things like planetary motion and that, and the fact that you can observe laws of physics.
Fundamental laws of physics.
Yeah, physics.
Well, he might not be thinking of it quite that way, but that's how it translates.
I'm translating as the probability theory in things.
Well,
Some events occurs, it's going to occur.
if I know, he's actually basing it apparently on Aristotle, complete explanation of what knowledge how it came to be, efficient cause, the material cause, nature of objects material, form cause. Basically, there is a certain, this probably gets back to the Platonic argument before, there is a pattern somewhere in heaven that is what the ideal should be, including acting morally, and then specific behaviours. April is an example here. So there is in nature, in our description of nature, those four causes that come from Aristotle. That's, I believe, how it developed. Again, I'll be subject to any comment. Those that might know this.
Sorry, how does that go to the flying argument?
On the concept of Aristotle's four causes, back to here, This make the links. How do we make those links so that we can say how do non-intelligent beings have a particular function? And they were based on 4 causes. And he's appealing to arguments, as I say, he did draw on other people's truths, and the truths he drew on for this one was Aristotle. Efficient cause, there's something, any pattern we see in the non-animate world has something that must have acted on it. There's an efficient cause, a material cause. As I say, the nature of the object material, is it something that itself causes that behaviour, or is it something outside of it? Formal cause, and it's obviously that's a difficult one. It does appeal to probably Platonic and Aristotle. It means there's a pattern somewhere you should be trying to match. And the final cause was a goal that was built into something right to work out. And all of those have a teleological implication.
Going back to the original argument, like it says, so you got non-intelligent objects behaving in regular ways. So then they're saying these non-intelligent objects are not smart, so they can't be the source of that regular behaviour. So there must be so their behaviour must be designed by something that's intelligent. Yes. So that's the argument.
Classic laws of gravity, magnetic attraction and propulsion, things that affect the way matter behaves. So it's magical.
Yes. Well, it could be something like a tree too.
They're not the way the physical world behaves as well.
That doesn't have to be intelligent, does it?
It doesn't, but I mean, I think again, going back a few years now, but one of the arguments, philosophical arguments, if the world is completely random, no specific thing, then why do we see things as they are? That we should be just a series of random atoms. There should be nothing there. We should be just the smallest particles, a matter drifting aimlessly, perhaps with occasional thoughts gone together. We don't see that. We see a very, you see us, we're very well made in many respects.
We're just only one little bit of the universe. The rest of the universe is chaotic. Stars exploding, black holes, the whole thing.
But when you say laws, I think it's different. When you say laws.
That's right, it's not chaos.
He's talking about
It's the same laws. And even within those laws, we can have what appears to us to be order. But you get on the beach, you have a look and you see the tide coming, and you see all the stones are all organised and weed and all that. Then they all get washed out and they're all over the place, and the tide comes in and they put back in their own little places. Okay, that's obvious due to the friction on the ground and the masses that they have and all that sort of thing. So you have these forces in these forces in the universe which make things appear as though they are ordered. Because to us, the heavy things and the lighter things, that's order. So you can get order, and if you get order, that self-replicating molecules in DNA, which are able to reproduce themselves and set up and produce proteins and all the rest of it, and there's that's doing that, causing the order to increase on it. But our poor old sun there has lost a lot of its order because it's just branching light and heat and energy into space, which is the sacrifice of putting some order in our planet. So I think it's wrong to say that we're living in a universe made for people. And I think it's wrong to say that it is not chaotic. It is chaotic.
But I think again, you have to write back, there are 14 forces or characteristics of nature that are so fine-tuned, so finely tuned that they are just a fraction, a few percent off. And we wouldn't be here, we'd be just drifting around here.
There's more than that. Can I read out the other sense? I think it goes. So one, premise one, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity chance or design. So that's why this is his formulation. Yes, of what Aquinas said. It's not an updating. It's not due to physical necessity or chance, right? I mean, even all physicists understand it's not due to chance, and therefore it is due to design. So that's really one of the simplest arguments that there is.
The fine-tuning argument is a modernised version of this, based on recent physics.
Which interestingly, he used the same logic, so the same logic is being supported by our 21st century physics.
Yeah.
Coincidence?